Hello, everybody. Achilles Justice here with the Philosophy Society. It's July 5th, 2023. So we are going to start with a continuation of last week. And I met somebody this weekend, and I told them that I would incorporate some content for that individual for today. So I'm going to maintain my integrity and do that. There may be a few people joining online. Otherwise, we're good to go. Anything that you wanted to start with? Okay. So last week, we had three fundamental kind of concepts that I think are super important to talk about. One was psychological properties that we can be mindful of. So this is in the facet of mindfulness. And that's either for the self or the other. So one is our own attention. What are we paying attention to? Another one would be our affect or emotional response. How am I feeling? Then there's our nonverbal behavior, how we're acting in some ways. And lastly is like our verbal or semantic content, what we're saying. And that can also include like thoughts and beliefs as well. And so attention in some ways is like the common denominator for all of these properties. So we would put attention at the bottom, and then above that, everything else kind of goes with it. So there's affect, nonverbal behavior, and then verbal semantic content, because we use the attention to make process all of those other ones. You can't use semantic content to be mindful of attention. It just doesn't fundamentally make sense, right? So mastering our attention through some meditative practice or mindfulness is one of the fundamental first things that we really have to do. When it comes to like this, all this stuff kind of goes under the concept of self-mastery. And so we can discuss what the notion of self means. And I would say that there is a fundamental similarity between the self within our own embodied being and the self of others. And we can say there is some variance relative to individuals' psychological predisposition, like if they have brain damage or a developmental disorder, if they're under substances, where they are on the age spectrum. So yeah, so that's this stuff. And then this little concept was like the social orientation based on beliefs or values. So different people can be defined as a group based on what they believe, also how they behave, and different practices they have. But it's important for us to have a sense of what the nature of beliefs are and how this whole collection of people acts as a unit based on their beliefs. And so we have political groups, religious groups, and a whole bunch of other kinds of groups, vegan groups, people that go to McDonald's, they believe it's good. And then we have another frame or lens to observe. In this context, it's the social situation or situations in general. Like there can be a situation like a fire, and it's not necessarily social until a group of people are present. When there's a group of people, then the context itself, the brackets is like, so this is like this. There could be people within it that have their own beliefs, but the context is the thing that frames it. It's going to invalidate some beliefs. Like let's say somebody doesn't believe in fire. They're just like, they're from space. They were born in a spaceship, and they've just never experienced fire before or whatever. There's no oxygen where they're from, something like that. They're like, I don't believe in this thing that you call fire, right? But that doesn't matter. It's independent of the specific content of this person's belief. So the reality of the situation, or just that's synonymous, the reality that composes what the situation is for those individuals is vitally important. And so this one is heavily empirical. And it's a notion of reality. And so this goes back to something I mentioned, I don't know, it was last week before, the correspondence of our beliefs to reality itself. we want our beliefs to make sense. So whatever the content of person X, belief A, right? We want that to make sense with reality. And if we do our Venn diagram, it would end up right there somewhere, right? So this is like a truth correspondence. And so when we say the whiteboard or we say the eraser, the word eraser ostensibly means this specific thing. So having a sense of these concepts and properties and how we can use it as a perspective to observe our experience and the social experience we're in is important, because these are in some ways the fundamental properties of what makes up how we act and how we behave and how we may develop like a mental illness, for example, right? Or how some social weirdness may occur, like bullying or something like the bystander effect. So the bystander effect would be like if there's a car accident, so that's a situational factor. The individuals present, if we increase the amount of individuals present, there's a decrease in response to the emergency. So if that's a bias, and we would say that a healthy social environment is where people don't engage in the bystander effect, people set aside some time and they call 911 or they do whatever to help these individuals that are in an emergency, that would be a good situation. We want to be in that kind of society. And so the hypothesis would be that if we can give people some kind of a framework, some properties, like the fundamental properties of a human within a social and situational context. So the way we would look at it is, this is like a bottom up or top down approach. So you have the person, which is situated in like a social context. So there's the individual. That's the first level of the property. The social is the second level, and then the situation is like a third level. Okay? The social is like a bunch of people. And it would be projecting upwards. I should like redraw this. Alternatively, you can look at like reality of the situation, whatever that might be, and then you could have a bunch of individuals that are composing that reality, and then you could be like one person on top, right? So from this perspective, it's very phenomenological. So that's your first person perspective. With this is just more of a reality situation. Like what is, or reality. And then the social and the individual are layered on top of that. And so depending on which orientation we take, this is the unbiased view, where there are objects in the room, then there are people, and then there is me, you know? Because of the way that social groups kind of influence us. Whereas this one is like, our biases are like within it. Like I am like, it depends on where you're at. Like you fundamentally always perceive it from this perspective, from your own individual perspective, and then through the lens of the group, and then whatever is left over. This is like a scientific approach. What exists, you know, the people there, like the sociocultural biases that are on top, and then my own sliver of individuality after the fact. So if we have social problems, so we say, okay, there's social / psychological problems. What do we do about that? We kind of want to fit them in the map somewhere here. So if it's a problem of the individual, we could say like, you know, I was going to go with ADHD, right? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So that is the first property here, right? It can also affect an individual's belief, right? So they may just believe they're not good at an educational context. They're not good at studying, right? And then the situational factor So this is more of like an environmental situation. So that would be external to the individual. But there's also an internal situation as well. So, so I'm doing a review from last week. So there's the psychological properties: attention, affect, nonverbal behavior, verbal, semantic content, thoughts and beliefs. And we can create some awareness of these things through mindfulness within ourselves and within the other. There's also social orientation based on beliefs. So what makes a group? And that's where we talked about religious groups last week. And then over here would be the environmental situational context. So if there's a fire in the building, that's going to have a dramatic impact on what I believe is the most important thing for me to do. And even if I don't believe it, it's still going to affect me in that situation, or me as I am because of the situation. So this one's very empirical. This one is relative to the semantic content of the individuals. And then this one is, as an individual, what properties can I distill out? So last week we talked about the periodic table of elements from chemistry, right? And then you have like proton, neutron, electron. And then this, we get different chemical elements. I have to take time to put effort into what I'm writing so you can actually read it. And so what I'm saying with yes.
I thought I had an extra one. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, so there may be more properties. I'm not saying this is an infinite list to the nth degree, but there is at least these 4 that we can work with now. So let's just figure out those 4 properties first: attention, affect, emotional response, nonverbal behavior, and verbal semantic content. That's a lot. Like just that itself, that's like a whole ocean of things to deal with, right? There's a lot you can do with that. Over here, we're going to break down the nature of a social group based on their beliefs or values. We have not included tradition, which you could say is like habit through generation, right? And then also just increments like present habits. That's important to talk about. There may be present habits of a current group that's not being passed to the next generation. And we can discuss other properties of groups. Not necessarily relevant at the moment, but there's more we can go. So it's not an exhaustive list. And then the environmental context. And last week I talked about dancing a little bit and how depending on where you are, like if you're on the subway, you're in a classroom, you're at the corner store buying gas, whatever, that's the situation itself will have an influence on how we act and behave and what we're doing. So there's different ways we can take these 3 lenses and look at them. So we can go from the situation itself down to the social, down to the individual, or we can go from the individual to the social to the situation itself. The situation is supposed to be unbiased. It's supposed to be our observations only, right? And so it's supposed to be objective in the sense that like the amount of chairs in the room is not a subjective number. It's a quantifiable number that we can measure and we can understand. So even if I made an error, we could rule out that error through accurate measurement and retesting. So this way, we all look at the world through our own perspective. That's just the nature of the human condition, right? So this is something that'd be important. The human condition. That just kind of means that like, there's only so many things that you can change. And your first person perspective is not one of them.
Change as in yourself, like changing yourself or changing your environment.
Like you can't not be Dimitri. You always have to be that person, right? Like even if you change your name, you're still the same person, right? Like unless there was like brain damage. Like if I lost all my memories, I may not be the same person anymore. Yeah, we could talk about that. And I think it'd be interesting to like measure it, to see like, does it person do they still like the color blue, for example? Or do they still prefer a Big Mac, you know? Because sometimes ego death can just be like the narcissist's wolf in sheep clothing defense, that they say that they have killed their ego, but it's really just a woke pop culture way of avoiding criticism with themselves or from other people. The ego comes from Freud, and in contemporary psychology, in social psychology, we talk about self-concept, the way that I conceive of myself, how I see myself.
Ego is only momentarily. Ego death. It's not like a prolonged state. You have to have a sense of self.
That's the point, right? So what does it mean to say ego death? I think there's a way to have a healthy sense of self. And that's why we look at the David Burns feeling good stuff. How can I modify my thoughts and my perspective so that it's a healthy, so it's realistic? So, okay. So let's say we have social psychological problems. If this framework is a way that we can map onto the existing psychological and social landscape, or the phenomena that exists out there, either in myself or others, then it would make sense that we can include areas of the landscape that need some work, right? So if I go into a building, and let's say the floor is broken, I can look at blueprints of what the floor ought to look like. I can look at the materials it's made of. One thing is there's an external context or reality situation, and an internal context, reality, or situation. So my psychological predisposition, there may be parts of my psychology I can't change. And some may argue that certain conditions like maybe ADHD have a neurological basis, and that's just the way it is, right? You're born that way, and you may need to take amphetamines to counterbalance your attentional problems, right? But it also may be the case that it's hyperactivity disorder, you being able to sit in a place for a very extended long period of time. It could just be that you have maybe a genetic predisposition to be a very athletic individual, right? And our current cultural framework of being in an office or a classroom is non-conducive to the genetic predisposition you have, and your inability to survive in this current day, now you get labeled with a disorder. But really, there's nothing wrong with you, right? Unless it's like you could argue that maybe it's the case, like, I don't know, someone's picking berries and they're so hyperactive that they can't even pick the berries and bring the berries back. Okay, maybe sure, or whatever, from a hunt.
This one psychologist said that ADHD is just an impairment. It's considered an impairment, not a disability he's had.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting way of putting it.
Well, I'm pretty sure it's in the DSM-5. I could double check, but
apparently there's 7 different types. One psychologist. I haven't read too much into it, but like a few days ago I saw this one psychologist talking about it, and there's 7 different types of ADHD, and you can treat each of them.
We can talk about that. We can go to that in more detail. I'm taking this concept of ADHD, and I want to see if it maps onto this framework in almost a way to falsify the framework. Right? If this framework is useful, that would mean that we could take every psychological or social problem and filter it through this and then generate out some kind of a solution, right? Otherwise, the framework might not work, right? So one thing is that we want to rule out the problem of a neurological condition, right? And so that would be something that you can't change. So when we look at the property of attention, that's directly related to this specific disorder, as well, like non-verbal behavior. And the act of mindfulness would be one response, right? And my solution to this goes down to like a neuroplasticity. There's 2 things. One would be neuroplasticity. Sorry, I'm just going to.
It's the same as neurogenesis.
Neurogenesis is like when the brain grows plaque. This is more about like when through habits and the way you live your life, your neurons grow differently. So one is the extent of how much can neuroplasticity help with ADHD. So how much could, for example, mindfulness meditation and focusing, or Zen meditation, focusing on one specific thing and practicing our attention help with an individual that has ADHD or ADD. The second one would be like lifestyle management, right? Or habit development. right? So in this sense, it would be doing a bunch of exercise in the as soon as you wake up during the day, right? And maybe deciding on specific careers that take a lot of physical exertion, right? Like being a firefighter, for example, maybe, or being a carpenter or something like that. And so what we would have to do is we would have to, so the neuroplasticity thing, both of these in some ways affect our internal situation, right? It affects my internal psychological state. If I'm engaging in mindfulness as a practice over and over again, it's going to change my the gray matter in my prefrontal cortex and my ability to use my executive function, which is the thing that manages my attention. And then the next thing would be, well, we could say that the individual's beliefs about their condition can have a self-fulfilling prophecy to affect what they do about it, right? So in the belief thing, there's the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is I may believe something that's not true, but the belief in itself makes me change my behavior, which makes the thing true in the end anyways. So someone says, I'm a very bad driver, even though it's not the case, that they never have no accidents. And then because they believe that, they drive poorly and then they get into an accident, right? And then the other one would be specifically managing my attentional properties. So we would be using these in the way, so for affect, if I lose my focus on something, I'm going to learn to not get upset about it and to have like a moment of letting go. That's the mindfulness part. Let go of my attention, or let go of it, and then come back to it and exercise it like a muscle, right? So we would want to test that thesis out, in some ways before we engage with an amphetamine treatment plan, right? All right, so we have that's a falsifiable thesis to see it. Let's see if this works. So that's one thing. And if it is the case that it doesn't work, then we would have to use the internal situation, and we'd have to do amphetamine treatment. Right? In our current society, people are usually not willing to modify their lifestyles until they get to the point where they've resolved some social psychological problem. They just really, like the way that the culture is, it's the pharmaceutical companies try to push drugs and get people to just pay for it, and it's a big industry, and so that's kind of where we're at with it. The problem is side effects. Like when we read through Feeling Good, we saw the long list of side effects at the end of the text. And the other thing is that you don't really have autonomy, right? You're putting a lot of your resources, a lot of your, I don't want to use the word faith, a lot of your reliance on an external substance and not something that's within your own self-control. And so it would be optimal to find a different way if we can manage ourselves differently. And if we can learn in the moment when we're in a specific situation, how to utilize our attention specifically in a way that's good for us, that achieves our goals. And it might even be the case that the individual would have to record the session and then come back and listen to it again, right? Okay, so that's one example. So another example would be like anxiety. So what do we say about anxiety? So, okay, any questions so far? Yes.
I just wanted to add, for what it's worth, regarding the amphetamine treatment, that North America is the most highly medicated society in the world in comparison to everywhere else. So I wonder what that says about us as a society. That we would rather resort to a treatment rather than trying different things beforehand.
Yeah. And so the reason that I'm saying that let's look at these perspectives is maybe that's the foundation of having a lifestyle management approach. That really is the cornerstone of well-being, which is the contrast of like mental illness, right? Someone may have a neurological condition, but like this Thomas Sayers presentation that I gave, that's not necessarily a mental illness. That's a physiological illness. The mind is not something that is equivalent to the body, at least according to Thomas Sayers. So, yes, anxiety. So anxiety is like a state of apprehension that something is going on that I'm not in control of, or something in the future is going to occur that instills like maybe a fight or flight response of fear, right? And it can be quite debilitating. Certain situations that we have low performance in can stimulate anxiety. And a big part of this can come to our verbal semantic content, the property of our thoughts or beliefs. We can have thoughts that, or our perspective, the way our attention is being used, right? We may focus on certain details that generate unnecessary emotion, the emotion of anxiety. Having some anxiety can be healthy, right? So for example, like today, I signed a finance deal for a car. It's going to cost me $500 a month. That gives me a little bit of anxiety, right? Why? Because my expenses just went up. I can utilize my anxiety for good, right? So the way that I manage my emotions can in turn become motivational in a healthy direction. So when we talk about like anxiety disorders, if the person is just getting anxiety, they have anxiety all the time about everything, or like agoraphobia, they don't want to go outside. There can be like specific triggers, and an individual has associated certain situational contexts, right? Or they can have negative beliefs. It may not be like a social group per se. It would just be like the situational context and the psychological property. And so when I talked about the suffering thing, that was the thing that I communicated to this individual that I met that I was going to talk about today. So both of these social psychological problems can be the cause of suffering, right? And so what I am trying to do is say, what control do we have? What can I do for that which I am faced?
Like,
Sure.
become aware of it instead of
Yeah, mindfulness. Yeah.
Instead of distracting ourselves from it.
Yeah.
Or self-soothing with drugs or alcohol
Okay.
or music or a distraction. I guess that falls into mindfulness.
Right. You have a serious book right now.
A lot of things going on in my head.
Good. It's good.
I just can't articulate it at the moment, but
Hey.
I'll get back to me in a minute.
You're like, you have this like face, like it's like a, I don't know what the expression is, but it's great. I love it. Okay, so what do we do about anxiety, right? We don't want to say that we just want to be emotionless and have no affect. That's a condition in itself, right? So these emotions, we've evolved them for a purpose, and learning how to utilize the existing psychological properties we have. That's like being the pilot of the homunculus ship, right? Is that I am a being, this human condition situation, and I'm learning to navigate myself. And I am such a self that has different kinds of emotions. And so from the phenomenological perspective, right here, right, if I'm looking at the cosmos or my experience this way, through my own psychological properties, through the social group that I exist in, and then the actual real situation that I'm in. Maybe there's a dichotomy here. This could be flipped if you're the only person in the room, right? But as soon as other people are present, like we talked before about the Hawthorne effect, it immediately changes, like without you even knowing it, you're going to change.
I thought the Hawthorne effect was only in the presence of authority, like a boss watching you do work, or like a teacher on top of your shoulder when you're writing, don't make you mistakes. Where is that? Unless the observer.
There's I'm just kind of including a bunch of biases together. One example is the Hawthorne effect. But there's other biases like just being observed in general. Knowing that people are watching you and people are there, your behavior will change, right? So this could flip maybe, depending on the fact. So it might look like this. There's like the psychological one, and then I can go down to either social or reality. Either, this one first, then after that, it would be reality. After that, it would be social. So we can do like a little flow chart. It would just alternate if you're alone, So maybe this one wouldn't occur. It's only you. But even so, your conditioning, right? Like how you were socialized and the cultural group you identify with is going to have some little mini social effect inside you anyways. Even though if no one's present right now, like if you had some like I think my grandmother all the time. My grandmother socialized me a lot as a little kid because I spent a lot of time with her as a little kid. So that's always present with me for whatever reason,
Like
right?
putting you in social situations.
Even when I'm alone, because of how it affected my psychological development. It was a social factor that affected my development. So even when no one's around, it still has an influence on me. Yeah.
Could you give an example of how she socialized you, even if you were alone?
It must be just so. Like she would say stuff like there is a right way to do things, right? And so her neuroticism was a little high. And so it taught me to approach situations in a bit of a neurotic way. That things have to be, and conscientiousness, those things together, ordered. And when they're not ordered, it's upsetting, which would be the neurotic part. And so I don't even really notice, but sometimes if I'm being mindful, then I'm like, hey, like this is, I can hear her voice sometimes. I'm like, oh yeah, right? Like when we look at the automatic thoughts that are coming in, it's almost like I can remember her saying stuff to me. You know what I mean? Some people say that's before the age where memory is solidified, but it's I'm just kind of translating it from a socialization context. So, okay, anxiety. So we may be around other people that are causing anxiety, for example, right? If you're out with some friends, or if you have like an intimate relationship and that individual's like not supportive, for example, right? Like if you're dealing with an environmental situation, like let's say you have an exam coming up and your partner is not supportive of that, that can generate more anxiety, right? Or if you're trying to take care of a kid and the other individual, you don't feel safe or comfortable with them, or they're not meeting your needs, that can generate more anxiety, right? So part of this is, yeah, in this side, one of the properties is going to be action. Action and then decisions. And what these things are going to do is it's going to change the situation. I don't like using the word manipulate. Like if I go like this with the thing, you can say like you are manipulating the object. But manipulation has the, like, as a definition, like when we talk about narcissism or other disorders, it's to deceive people. I am manipulating you in a Machiavellian sense. So to avoid the fallacy of equivocation, I'm not going to use that term, right? So it's better to say that, just use the word change, right? So if there's like a fundamental property, you know, like there's something here and something here, and there's like a big thing here and a thing here, and the only way in or out is this way, right? And let's say I like remove this property, whatever that is, and now I have something here. I can like go that way. That has changed the situation. So for example, if one of my, I have a party at my house and one of the people there gets very drunk and they smash something, right? And every time I have a party, something gets broken. Either they fall or they get angry and they break stuff. If I stop inviting that person, and so every time I have to deal with this, I have to either fix it or have a discussion with them, or even if they make a mess, right? They leave beer cans everywhere, right? That's a property of the situation that's being created. It's not really a belief that's creating the group or the influence of other people on the individual, really. It's not really, like, it's a nonverbal behavior, or sorry, yeah. It's a nonverbal behavior. They're doing something. I could be aware of it, but it's an external environmental factor that the other person is engaged with, right? And so having boundaries, I guess that's another thing. We can talk about, yeah, social boundaries.
Would that be an environmental or social orientation? Or boundaries?
What the boundary would be doing is it will be you taking this person and removing them from the group.
Due to their actions.
Because of their habits or the way they think about stuff, right? So because you're removing them from the group, you're taking this property out and putting it over here. It's changing the situation, right? And so that's something that's super important. In another sense, You may remove yourself from a situation. You may say, this isn't working for me. Right? Like when we go back to the verbal somatic content and we talk about like the automatic thought stuff from feeling good.
Like subconscious thoughts. No problem.
Automatic thoughts. You may not be distorted. Your feelings might just be that this makes me uncomfortable. Like this person is being negligent. You know, or they lack compassion, they lack empathy. And through a mindful awareness of ourselves, I understand that that's something that I need. Therefore, I'm going to remove myself from them because just being in their presence, I may expect a certain kind of treatment because of the way I was socialized. So this is a different thing than anxiety. This is like, it could be generational anxiety, but it could also generate depression. Right? And about that. Now these mood disorders are different than ADHD. These can have a different series of elements in our lives that are affecting us to have a general mood state. And I would say let us falsify that first before medicating ourselves, because maybe medicating ourselves is just kind of like not changing my life, which is the reason why I feel like shit. When as if I just change things in my life, if I change things in the way that the situation presents itself through actions, decisions, social boundaries, right?
Would PTSD fall into the same categories as anxiety and depression?
Oh, is PTSD a mood disorder? I don't think so. I have to double check. So one of my psychology professors said, Dr. Goldstein from Lincoln University in 2006 or so, 2007, said an organism will only change when its environment changes. And this has influenced many of the decisions that I've made in my life. So for me to change myself, the human condition, so one of the properties here is the self, right? Like, let's say you don't like yourself. What are you gonna do? Right? How do you change yourself? In a non-depressed way. Like, let's say it's like, I'm not upset about it. There's some things about myself I don't like. Like, when I become mindful of it, I get dissonance. I'm like, I don't want to be that kind of person. And in some ways, that is the beginning of growth. To recognize that I'm here, I'd like to be up here. How do I get there? What do I do? And so our thoughts is one of them. My perspective or my attention is another. And my nonverbal behavior or habits, these are all properties of my being or what makes up myself. And so one way to do that is changing the environment. When I change the context, when I remove myself from a place that doesn't make me feel good, then let us see what I feel like after the fact. And how can I utilize this new space to be more healthy for my what I need, right? Whereas some individuals could not perceive any control, not believe that they have some belief that they can't remove themselves, and then they're depressed, and then they just maintain this, they just suffer. Going back up there to the top right, they just suffer. Now, PTSD is something that's occurred in the past, right? And from a diagnostic perspective, it has to be like life-threatening or like a extreme sexual assault situation, or you observe someone in a life-threatening situation like in war, right? You're like in a tree and people are getting killed on the ground, crazy stuff, right? This stuff happens.
Or extreme damage to their dignity, I think, like public embarrassment, but to an extremely high degree. I think that's one of the elements of PTSD, I think.
Yeah, in the diagnosis, it has to be life-threatening. I think trauma, we could talk about trauma as like a psychological property. and they're like what you're saying could be traumatic for somebody. You know what I mean? Like if someone pulled your pants down, you're in bed, something like that. Like, oh yeah, you know, that could be traumatic. Or if someone threw a bunch of food at you, you know, or if you're like at your wedding and people threw eggs at you.
Oh, I was just going by memory. I thought that was one of the things included in PTSD. It didn't. I mean, yes, life threatening, but it can also be threatening to their dignity. But I could be mistaken.
And to your well-being. Like
And
if
then
something's happened to you where it's had such a negative effect on your well-being where you can't function, I believe that might fall under.
Like an extreme social embarrassment, but to an extremely kind of harmful degree, I think. I could be mistaken.
We can go into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so with a past situation, if the individual, you know, like there's like a graph, there's 0, like T1, T2, T to the N order. And then this is like you feel good, you feel bad, right? If a very, very bad thing occurred at T1,
Is T1 or is T1 sample?
time one,
Time one.
and then it went up, and then something else bad happened at T2, and then something kind of whatever happened here, and then this is like the present. And this specific situation, you know, is like creating in the present moment, like flashback, for example, or you can't sleep, you have nightmares, night terrors, and you wake up, right? Those are like some symptoms of PTSD. Or you can't get inside of a car because you freeze and you start having intruding thoughts of being in an accident. So with this, part of the situation is how we're like processing those experiences, you know, what's happened in these situations here. And so one of the approaches is something called the constructive narrative approach. It's what are the thoughts I have? What's the semantic content related to what's the story I tell myself with this? And the other one would be how am I processing the emotions from that place? So we can take these properties and apply them to how the mind or, you know, the limbic system or whatever is processing the those experiences such that in the present moment it is not debilitating anymore, right? And a social group can be very, very helpful. If you have a group of people where you're able to express those emotions and they're receptive to it, that can help an individual recover from these kinds of experiences. If you feel alone and you have no one to talk to and it's not accepted, which is kind of a situation because sometimes these experiences, not many people have been there or done that. And so they don't know what to say, right? Or how to respond to you. So having a social group that has the value of being able to communicate about that stuff can help reduce this suffering for this individual. So part of what we're looking at here is, this is a good little map. We got a lot to work with. And we don't want to say that it necessarily has to be exhaustive right now, because I'm winging this, actually. But at least we have something to start with. And what we can do is we can add elements or properties or functions relative to what we've discovered is working in treatment plans for existing mental health issues or social problems, right? And then we can create a very robust, I would almost say, technology to apply to whatever people are going through. That's kind of the thing. And then that is a way that we can deal with suffering. When somebody is suffering and you're in a negative psychological state, so you have your object is negative, it's not good. I mean, negative sign. What are we going to do about that, right? One thing could be like, what are your beliefs? What are the beliefs of people around you? How are they affecting you? What's like the influence of these individuals to you? What's the social, like what's the situation? How can you remove yourself and do things? What are action decisions or boundaries you can have? How can you change the environment? And then what are your own psychological properties? What's going on with you? How can we be mindful of that over time? And when I change a property, what is the net effect on my well-being? Right? Because some people may not know what to do, and then they develop learned helplessness. That's not good. They just freeze, and they just maintain the suffering for however long. So we would prefer not to be in that situation, right? For ourselves or other people.
What do you mean by learned helplessness?
So Martin Seligman, he did an experiment where there was a cage and there were rats in the cage. So on the cage, one side was electrified, the other side wasn't. Okay. And so there was a little fence. So on this side, he would shock the rats. They would run around and couldn't get anywhere, and they would just sit there. If there was no fence and if they're electrified, they would run over here and they would be fine. Right? But if he kept them electrified for long enough and then removed it, they wouldn't believe that there was anything they could do to stop it. So they would just stay and under this condition of suffering. They would stay on the electrified side. And so he termed, I don't like using the word coined, it's weird. It's like minting concepts. He termed that phenomena learned helplessness.
It was environment.
The environment itself, prolonged exposure to a certain environmental context, led the organism to believe there was no other context.
Is it like the one with the fleas? Have you seen that? The fleas in the jar?
No.
Where there's this scientist, I forgot his name, he puts fleas inside a jar and they're all like jumping all over the place. Some are going on the outside, some are going on the inside. And he put a lid on it for maybe like 2 days or something. And then when he took the lid off, all the fleas learned that they couldn't go higher than where the lid used to be, even when it was off.
Yeah, same thing.
So I'm assuming it's the same concept.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is not dissimilar to the freeze response, which is the third one from fight or flight. And freeze is considered the worst reaction to any sort of trauma. And this is often found in people that are in places of war because there's no way of coming out of it. They just have to put up with bombs being dropped on them all the time. So people, those populations tend to exhibit, as you said, a learned helplessness. Which is quite sad.
Yeah, the freeze response I think is different. It's like an instantaneous response in like a threatening situation. Whereas learned helplessness is like when the organism is like testing out the environment, it just stops testing after a little while. It doesn't bother checking anymore. It's like if I go to like if there's raspberries in this one spot and I go there and I eat the raspberries and then I go back and there's none, and then I go back again, there's none, I'm going to stop going there after a little while.
You do the same with people? Like
Yeah.
in relationships or failed relationships?
Yeah, people can just give up.
So what is the solution?
You would have to like show that there's something there. You have to reteach the organism that they can do it. That would be like empowerment, right? And in some ways it's a motivational thing. So in this context, what we're talking about is how can we evaluate, but assess the fundamental properties of what the human condition is. And then once we know what the properties are, then we can move those properties around to get what we want for ourselves and other people. And that's the blueprint of psychological health and social health. That's the goal, right? And so, yeah, I think that's a good thing.
The learned helplessness that is connected with the organism will only change when its environment changes.
We can connect that. Yeah. So that's an interesting point. So what that means is like the organism doesn't know that the little fence is gone. So that goes down to like, see, for us, that can be a belief thing, right? If you don't believe it's true, we can maybe use our reasoning faculties and then figure out that it's true, right? Whereas an animal, you'd have to like move them there or something like that, or you'd have to teach them, basically.
Through the reward system, I believe.
Yeah. So to change the environment, it would be like if this is the little rat dude, you'd pick him up and put him over here. You'd be like, hey, I'm not getting shocked anymore. Like, wouldn't think that, but it would feel different, obviously, right? Whereas for us, sometimes what I can do is I can convince you. I can say, hey, there's this new transportation in the city. What's that? They have these little helicopters like on every street corner, and you can just go inside them and fly around. Like, I don't believe you. Like, okay, I'm going to show you. And you're like, wow, I'm going to try it out myself. The subway sucks,
How about if they were electrified so much that it affected their cognitive health, that no amount of reasoning could get through to them because their brain doesn't work anymore the way it used to? So how do you solve that?
To do the what? Sorry, you're fine repeating that again.
The rats that were electrified on the left-hand side, what if the abuse that they had suffered was to a degree where they were damaged physically, so like their brain. So no amount of reasoning could tell them that you'll be fine if you go on the other side. So at that point, there's a problem with their cognitive health, right?
Well, you were talking about brain damage, maybe.
Yes, brain damage, essentially. So at that point, I mean, what would the solution be?
Again, we go back to the neuroplasticity point, okay? When we say brain damage, like is it, how much damage are we talking here? Like, is it physical, like they took a hit to the head, or is it like traumatic?
It could even be just sort of middle ground where people that used to take SSRIs or SNRIs, and then they've stopped taking it, and then their brain no longer can create a healthy amount of serotonin, so they're just kind of crummy all the time, and they have to, they just can't get going. So then that kind of causes depression again.
Yeah, so we can.
Like, is that brain damage? It's a form of damage, I think.
I guess it depends on the way you define damage, for sure. Like, if the brain is not functioning in a way that it would without that intervention, then we can call it damage. And maybe the psychiatrist is taking a cost-benefit analysis and just kind of saying, well, if you're going to kill yourself, for example, it's better for you to live. It's like having glasses. Like, we prescribe people with glasses. If you have glasses, you get hit by a car. You would die young, or you'd hurt yourself cutting vegetables. So now we're going to give you this medication. You have glasses for the rest of life. It's medication for the rest of your life. Boom. That's what that could be one argument you can make. Yeah.
So is brain damage considered a lack of firing between synapses? Is that basically what brain damage is? A lack of communication between neurons and synapses?
There might be a neurological condition where someone's born like that.
I'm saying like through trauma or through like an event like we're seeing like with the rats. I was thinking, what if you like manually stimulate that part of the brain through like electrolysis to revive, let's say like CPR for those dead?
That's what Neuralink is kind of doing.
I would consider that like habit development as well. So putting yourself in environments where that would start to, you would get the connections firing up again.
Brain damage usually means that you got hit to the head, right? Or you got like a stroke, for example. Or drugs, right? So, or like long exposure to alcohol.
Lack of oxygen.
So these are examples of physical damage to the brain. That's usually what they mean by brain damage. So this is good. So one thing that's missing from this is like functions, like reasoning is a function. There are other functions that we can add to the list. Functions are, kind of like the action, decisions, and social boundaries. Reasoning can go here too, but it's a different kind of function. So really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a typology of this information, or like a systemized category or a set of categories that all fits together, that coherently responds to these conditions, that is also correspondent to the way our consciousness is, like, right? And how we can perceive things and process things. Philosophically, that's kind of what I'm trying to do. And I've been working on this for quite a while. And And I think it makes sense. Does it make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah, does this make sense to you?
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. Maybe I'm just completely out to lunch and I don't know what I'm talking about. And that might be the case. But-
It's connected, like you're saying.
I'm trying to make it, yeah.
I just have one concern. I wonder if is it possible to over-rationalize one's feelings? Because I find that sometimes when I try to be logical about the way I think or the way I feel, it takes away from me being present in my body and allowing my body to just sort of sort itself out. And to, like, for example, sometimes if I overthink things and trying to find a solution rather than just sitting with the emotion and trying to feel better naturally, I find that it just makes me even more anxious and I go away from finding a solution rather than arriving at a solution.
Yeah, so like so the last year we went through this book called Feeling Good. And so I would suggest buying it. It's like $15 on Amazon and going through it. I have some modules on the website that you can go through. And basically, like, one thing is being mindful of our thoughts. Getting through the emotion, sometimes when I am super overwhelmed, like just, I can't even think. I'm like in the middle of an anxiety attack or a panic attack, right? I will just do the deepest breaths possible, like for 20 minutes or until I feel better. That's all I do. I just, so there's one, that's like the Wim Hof kind of thing. I'm just going to take in as much oxygen as possible. Another method is just really slow deep breathing. So for like another 40 seconds, right? Of just like, I'll have like 1 minute is an entire inhale and exhale as a cycle. And then there is just letting my body, this is the third breathing technique, letting my body just breathe naturally. So I'm not controlling it, but I control my attention. So any thoughts, I work on in my inhibitory neurons. I'm going to let the thought go. Yeah. It inhibits things. It like, so I can like I can think about something and concentrate on it, or I can just like let it go. I can like focus on something, or I can just let it go.
Inhibitory.
Yeah. And so I want to practice letting go of ideas or thoughts or whatever. And so you can have a grip on the emotion and then you can try to feel nothing. Grip on the emotion, feel nothing. So let's say that the grip part, the intrusiveness of the feeling is happening on its own. So I don't have to worry about that. I'm just going to focus on the letting go of it. And so the breathing part is like a big deal. It's almost like when you were like a baby and your mother would just breathe with you. When if it was a healthy context, maybe she was so happy that you just existed, like she had a baby and she was like, I don't care, I'm just happy, I'm so happy with you. And her breathing with you like that calmed you down. You almost need to do that for yourself. And then you could have a thought, that, like a mantra, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. That's the thoughts. You just fucking 100 times, just repeat that. And then you just breathe as if everything is going to be okay. And do that 100 times. And in the Burns book, he would do like a self-assessment. How do I feel before the 100 trial mantra breathing technique? And then how do I feel after? And you may feel different. And then you could write it down out of 100, or like plus 100, negative 100. I feel negative 70 at the beginning. After I do it 100 times, I feel plus 30. That's a big deal. That's actually 100 units of emotion that I've flipped, right? That's great.
One thing that helps me too is just like visualizing the air going through my nostrils, down my diaphragm, expanding my lungs. And it keeps you present in the moment so you don't really focus on the thoughts. So I feel like when the worst part is that when we get the emotion, is that we feed the emotion with more thoughts. And by feeding the emotion with thoughts, that's where you're going like a down spiral, in my opinion. So sitting with the emotion itself, being aware of where the emotion is in your body. Sometimes it's in your neck, in your chest, in your belly, your abdomen. Be aware of where it is and breathe into it. Because it's temporary. It's not going to last forever, the feeling.
Where does compartmentalization fall into all this? Like, for example, what you're talking about right now, I'll look at it from a different angle. So I have X, which is bothering me and it needs to be fixed, but it's quite overwhelming right now. I don't have the capacity to take care of it because I'm extremely upset. So what I tend to do, and this is quite personal, I will take that X and then put it in a different drawer. And then I'll say, I will take care of that tomorrow at 9 a.m. Right now, I will enjoy this dinner that I'm having. And that somehow seems to work. Like I literally cut and then paste and it no longer exists. I don't know if that's healthy in the long term, but it has worked for me for many years. And then when I wake up at 9 a.m., I've had a good night's sleep. My brain is calm. And then I tackle it. And then that's it.
So you go back to it after. You don't just snooze it and forget.
Yeah, that's to me that's self-soothing and that's kind of getting delusional and pretending it doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah.
If you can set it aside for the moment, that would be coping with it. I'm not dealing with it right now. I'm going to cope by putting it in the drawer, and then later I will deal with it.
Because I've been accused of being like a psychopath for acting that way in situations. They'll be like, how can you be so calm when this is going on? And I think, because I'm not thinking about it right now, I'm going to think about it tomorrow.
I think that's emotionally mature.
Okay.
I think it's mature for you to be able to set things aside for now, and it shows a degree of self-control.
You might be at work, you might get a meeting, it might not be the right time to process that feeling or that event. Which happens to me
I
too.
always thought it was abnormal, but that was something that's worked for me.
I think that's a psychological strength. I think I think it's good. It would be one thing to completely dissociate. Like if you don't feel things for people, they don't affect you. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
Right. But if you can recognize this is upsetting to me, okay, like you're mindful of it, and then you can in a mature way deal with it later so that you don't sacrifice the present. That's healthy. That's good. It's unrealistic to think that I must always deal with everything immediately. And that's been one of my mistakes or problems in life.
That's the urgency culture, right?
Yeah. Well, it could be impulse control. I feel the impulse to deal with this right now. It could be like a lack of patience, or a lack of tolerance that I must always feel like perfect. And if I deviate from that at all, I must get back to there right away and not tolerate like 70%,
But is that bad?
to not tolerate stuff.
Yeah.
It is, because then if you're forced to deal with everything immediately, it may be inappropriate in some circumstances. And then you can maybe be like reactive and explosive. Like something happened this weekend and it upset me. And at a certain point, I realized I was starting to get very angry. And then I disengaged. I was like, nope, I'm not dealing with this now. And I think about it, I'm like, I don't know how, like even right now, I'm like, yeah, that sucks that happened. Someone broke the fence at my house. The gate.
Why do you think?
Yeah. I wasn't there and they were drunk and they broke it. And it pissed me off. In some ways, like, how dare you? Now I have more problems to deal with. But it's like, that's just the way it is now. For me to get like viscerally angry about it, it just hurts me and other people potentially. Now I am becoming a problem instead of solving the problem that was brought to me. And I can solve it by creating boundaries, saying you cannot be here unsupervised, clearly, because other people aren't able to manage that individual when they're not managing themselves. So I have to be there. And do I really want someone there that I have to have that kind of a relationship with? Not really.
Kind of toxic.
It's a little bit, it's like, fuck, bro, you bringing me bullshit. And you can't even accept responsibility for it. Right? So just as an example. So I recognized about like 5 seconds in, I was becoming angry again. And I let go. I was like, no, I physically just walked away. I was like, I'm going to my room. I'm doing other shit. And then I stopped getting angry. And if I think about it, I'm like, yeah, it makes me angry. So I'm just not going to think about it. I'm just going to like I can go this path, like the path of anger, or I can just go this path. And like, let's just say that like, is the result the same? I would have to like go, if this is the goal, I can be angry first and then solve the problem, or I can just not be angry at all and solve the problem. I might have a big habit. I used to get angry a lot when I was in my life. I could have a big habit of doing that. My neuroplasticity is like, this is something that you're very good at getting angry. You're a master anger person. You're super good at it. That's not a fucking skill. You know, like becoming a tyrant. The fuck is that?
Well, this is one of my issues with mindfulness, because if you were to accept the philosophy of mindfulness fully, it essentially says that if you are upset, to sit with that emotion then and there and to process it then and there. I don't think that's helpful in modern life to address these emotions right away, like what you had just demonstrated.
Well, okay. Being mindful is just being aware. It doesn't mean responding.
Okay.
Right? So you can be aware of a thing without responding to it. And so I was mindful I was angry. And then now that I'm aware of it, I made a decision to like go have a shower and clean the house or something like that.
So essentially how I process things, that is also mindful, even if I don't accept that emotion at that given moment.
Well, that's a different thing. You can be aware of acceptance is a different thing. You can be aware of the emotion, and then you can choose to, because the emotion can overwhelm you depending on what it is, right? And if you're stuck with issues of like anxiety or depression or even PTSD, part of the like John Kabat-Zinn, he wrote a book called Full Catastrophe Living, and it's like a response to PTSD through mindfulness, being aware of it but not letting it hijack your whole existence.
So being aware that the train is arriving in the station and allowing it to leave without hopping on the train.
Yes. Saying, I'm going to go get ice cream first. I don't want to go to where it's going. Or that train's on fire. I'm not getting in.
I think that's something that people with OCD struggle with as well, because of the intrusive thought. So I wonder if it's kind of similar with PTSD.
Yeah, so that's why the attention is the common denominator, right? Like consciousness, in some ways, is very intricately tied with attention. It's hard to pay attention to something and not be aware of it. It's basically synonymous. Right? Like, can you ever catch yourself paying attention to something and you're not aware that you're paying attention to it? Not really. Right? So, our attention is super important. And so that's why meditation is like a very important thing to do every day a little bit. Whether it's before you go to bed, when you wake up, sometime during the day, when you notice you're deviating from a healthy baseline state of your like mood and or state of mind, like you're, you know, I'm gonna repeat the same words. So yeah, we can continue with this discussion, but there's a lot there, you know, and the next step would be like fully exploring specific social and psychological problems, like as case studies, right? So like a social problem, I always bring up Putin's and the Kremlin's use of power to hurt the Russian and Ukrainian people, right? Not cool. It's not a good thing. And that's a social problem for the Russians. How are they going to deal with the fact that there's a tyrant overrunning their country, throwing people in jail because they don't have free speech? It's not good. You know, and then what do we say about the rest of the world? Does it matter for us? Well, the reason that NATO and all these other countries have responded is because They don't want to see a World War III. They don't want China to think it's appropriate. For example, China thinks that they own Taiwan and are waiting to see the right moment to reclaim that territory. And it's written like in their constitution, basically. So that's not a good thing for Taiwan, because a lot of people can die. And it comes back to like our autonomy as an individual, like back to the human condition. Like, do we have, like, what does it mean to be autonomous? Like free will, what does it mean to have that? Socially. And it's an ethical question. You know, like, where do we place that value? And the democratic nations of today, they made that like the most important thing. That we all agree that we have freedom. And we will exercise our freedom in choosing any form of leadership. And all government is meant to serve the people. That's its purpose. Not the other way around. The people are not meant to serve the leader or any hierarchy organization or whatever. So, yeah. And so how would we respond to social situations? And then we would go back to this property a bit more and then reference the psychological properties whenever we see weirdness here. Like if somebody has a weird belief, like, you know, sometimes people will justify the war in Ukraine because of the initial argument that there were like neo-Nazis there or something stupid like that, you know. But a quick counterpoint is that even if there were Nazis in Ukraine, like even if that premise is true, how do you justify bombing hospitals and apartment buildings and all the other civilian targets? Like, how does that make any sense? Doesn't, you know? And so we could look at the verbal semantic content, the thoughts and beliefs, and use the function of reasoning to evaluate that property. And then we would tell that person that you're blatantly wrong. Like it's the reasoning, it doesn't justify itself. As a thesis, it makes way more sense to say that, you know, it's most likely the case that Putin and the Kremlin just wanted that whole harbor and all of the grain that Ukraine has. And they just decided now's the time to take it over. We got Crimea, we could probably just take over all of Ukraine. They're not part of NATO, it's either now or never. Because maybe they'll join NATO in the next 7 years or something like that. And then we really can't take it over. And if we get that whole harbor, right, that's going to help us with our trade and we'll make more money that way for the country. Right? And like, as soon as the war began, they like stole a whole bunch of the grain. And certain countries in Africa are really upset because it's increasing starvation because they're not getting grain right now. Right? The production of grain is down. And so that makes more sense than saying they're going in there to eliminate Nazis, right? Or liberating Ukraine. Because if you're getting like liberating from what? You know, it's not like there was a civil war there and they went in as peacekeepers. Like if that would be different, there was a civil war, people were killing each other there, and they went in to defend anybody, that you would still not be bombing apartment buildings, you know? Or like churches and cultural centers and shit. Like, why are you doing that? You know, all of the data falls in line with things like cultural genocide. That makes more sense, which is complete fucking bullshit. You shouldn't be doing that, right? Or even China wanting to take over Taiwan. It's like it has become a sovereign nation now. And if Taiwan wants to join China as a province or something like that, well, then they can vote on it. Let them just don't kill people. What are you doing? They want to do it, then do it. But to coerce them with violence is not appropriate. And so the reason that the Western world or like democratic countries are engaging is because it's an indication to the whole world that if we allow tyrants to take over other countries, it could happen to us again. And we're getting to the point with space technology where you could exit orbit and land anywhere on the planet in like 30 minutes. So the oceans can't protect North America in the way that they did 100 years ago as technology increases, right? So, you got to be, this is not just when I say the human condition, it's like there's also like the condition of humanity. And so we need to deal with our psychological state, but we also need to deal with these social problems too. Because these social problems is an emergent phenomena of these psychological properties, of people with poor reasoning, of people that can't process cognitive dissonance in a healthy way. And so what do we do about that? And so that's where the Philosophy Society, I'm trying to equip people with whatever they need to do that. And I believe that this is what that would be. This is the beginning of that. And so like philosophy, utilizing the methodology of reasoning alone to achieve well-being, for me is not enough. There may need to be a social organization that's educational and empowering for people, and also like teaches people how to do these things, right? So that we can have a healthier world. That's wise. The love of wisdom, right? Humanity living in a utopian environment, like people say I'm an idealist. I think that's a good thing. Let's do that. Let's be normative and look at these ideals and map a way to get there. And so this is the beginning of that map. And and so on the queue is like mental health issues. Let's solve those problems. We have some social issues. I identified a couple of those, right? And we want to, within our own countries, like within North America, the United States and Canada, we want to be role models. We don't want to be like going into countries and going at war with them to steal their oil. It's like, come on, man. Because then those countries don't fucking trust you, right? And then 20 years later, when you need them to be your ally, they remember how you went in and killed a bunch of them, or you killed their friends across the border, right? So we need to lead by example, not be focused solely on immediate capital gains. What is in our immediate interest of, unethical capitalism? There's other ways that we can cooperate and still, not lose our place in the economy.
How do you increase your exposure? To do all that.
Me personally?
Yeah.
I have someone who's going to help me with. Wait, you can talk about this, or how do I organizational question?
What is like getting exposure to these ideas and these ways of solving certain issues within humanity?
Well, I would say that for me to make this idea more concrete, I would have to have a book that responds to all of the problems in a step-by-step process, like an instruction book, and then just kind of like publish it and then do instructional videos. Like think about all other problems in the world. Like if you want to cook chicken cacciatore, if I was like, I want to do that right now, I kind of have an idea, right? But maybe I'll watch a couple of videos.
You talked last time about, and you expressed reticence about it, outmonstering the monster. How about, in the world, all the Machiavellians of this world that have no desire to go through all this? How do you come to solutions when you're dealing with people like that?
There's more of us than them. Let's make more babies in our group than they can. There's one response. And then just like reduce the amount of psychopaths in humanity. There's one thing. Second thing is let's socialize them to act in a certain way. Like if psychopathology and Machiavellianism is a genetic predisposition, then just have more babies and be really good parents to them and teach them to be pro-social. Do that. That's a great thing. If you find someone you love and you have a really good relationship, have children. You don't need God to tell you to do it. You just got to be a good person and make more good people, and we'll have a good world. That's a good thing, right?
But then that bias that you mentioned, that the more people there are that are seeing something wrong going on, the less likely they will do something about it. And I want to maybe extrapolate that to what's going on in the world right now, where we have not very good leaders. But there's so many of us that are, very open-minded and are happy to go at things rationally, but we can't seem to kind of get people together and do something about it.
I think we just need to have, that's why I'm trying to break it down. That's why I've spent so many years going to school to try to figure it out, because I want to be able to explain it in a way that makes sense and that it works. Like, I'm trying to be pragmatic. That's why I'm saying, like, what are the properties? And that's a function of the brain. It's like, if the brain had sonar or some other thing like infrared detectors, like aliens would have a different setup, or AI will have a different setup. It'll be a little bit different, right? Like, if like in AI world, the Wi-Fi goes down, like for AI, like Wi-Fi would be a thing here, or some kind of like transmitting mechanism from a distance, right? Whatever that would be for them. But we don't have that problem. Like, we do kind of, but not really. We just speak and talk to each other. And when we gain information through observation, like we have empathy and mirror neurons, and I can feel people by just looking at their facial expressions and their posture. That's what our nonverbal communication is. And then there's verbal communication, right? But other organisms or forms of intelligence, it would be different for them. So for us, like, I believe that's why, like, I get meaning through believing that if there was an institution that taught this stuff, then people would at least have the tools to do it, right? Like, if you don't know how to fix the toilet when it's broken, then you have to call a guy. But if you do know how, then you just do it yourself. That's just like making the chicken cacciatore. If you know how to do it, you just cook it. But the problem with this stuff is that it just seems so complicated. People will say, we don't understand how the mind works. We don't understand how psychology works. Well, maybe you don't understand. Do we really not know?
Still learning about that.
That's fine. We can still be learning about things. But to say that it's completely unknown, just the darkness of this abyss, I don't think it's true, because, like, I had psychological problems and now I don't. And I can sense when I'm getting stressed out or when things are getting a little fucky for me. And then I change course, right? I think you have to prove it to yourself first. If you can't take care of your own shit, how are you going to help somebody else? And so that's what I did. I was like, I'm taking care of myself first. And I had a long life of suffering. And then I figured it out. And then I helped other people. I was like, if I can do it for myself, can I help this guy? And I did.
Through
Right.
suffering comes growth. Through suffering comes growth.
If you deal with
You
suffering,
deal with suffering, yeah. And
then you get growth. There you go. That's good, right?
So,
The suffering can lead to a very bad place, correct? Or places. So
It is through the crack that the light enters.
So the first step is to kind of learn these things. And I've been motivating people in the group to start taking classes with me or on their own. And you can join us in September. We're going to do another one. And this is complementary to the university in some ways. I don't espouse to be able to teach everything. There are people that have a lot of education and know a lot more things than I do, and I learn from them. And I motivate people to also do that. The university has its own bureaucratic issues, and I think that if you can learn to navigate that, then you can reap the benefits of the knowledge that it has to offer, right? And and so the way to deal with these things is to at least have some methodology and then learn to use it, right? And you just got to do it to your own life first. Like, take care of yourself first. And once you take care of yourself first, there's going to be somebody in your life that you care about, and the motivation will be there to help them. Like, if you have kids or a loved one or whatever. Sometimes on the street, sometimes I meet them and I care about them right away. Like, I feel for them and I bring them in my life. I'm like, get on the boat, right? And so start there. because you already have the instincts to be successful, or the passion to be successful with those people, including yourself. And like there are job openings in the Philosophy Society to help me with the overall conceptual analysis and completion of this idea, for sure. Like there's room for growth here for anybody that wants to help me, and I can't do it alone. And it's not meant to be completed by me per se. Like I have another 50 years of life left, assuming I can't transmit my consciousness to the AI cloud or have some kind of modification to my body where I live for another 200 years, which there's a high chance I will do that. I'm probably going to do it, One of my friends, he said that like Kurzweil believes that if you live to the year 2035, then you're going to live forever. He's like, if you look at the rate of technology growth, you only got to get that far, and then you'll be at the point where, I guess like a singularity almost. I don't know. So this is just like a way for me, humanity is at a point of like, I don't know, stupidity in some ways. It's like, why aren't we doing things a little differently? It seems very clear to me why we can't just do things a little differently, And a lot of people disagree with me, but that doesn't really change. That doesn't demotivate me, because I see the areas where I make a big difference, and either in myself or in others. And I just want to share that with other people, because then you can make a difference in yourself and others. And the goal is to turn the Philosophy Society into a sustainable economic entity, so it makes money. That way it can last longer and it can help more people. And so I've been studying some business recently to learn that. And anybody that can help me in that, to that end, is greatly appreciated.
Some book recommendations that a lot of successful people have relied their knowledge.
Sure. That's good.
I want to add something earlier when you said you have to take care of yourself before you take care of other people. So these last few chapters of my life, I've been continually adding on to this belief where at first I was like, okay, before you be a good friend, you have to be a good friend to yourself. And then after that, I was like, well, before you can be a good partner with someone else, you have to be a good partner with yourself. And then this recent book I read, it's like, in order for you to be okay in life, you have to be your own parents in a way. So for your own friends, your own spouse, and your own parents. Because sometimes our parents weren't always there in the highest, how do I put it? In the best way, let's say. Your friends, your spouse, or your parents. So you have to be all three to yourself.
But I think reparenting is a big thing with millennials. Because apparently our parents were known to be kind of not the best parents. That generation of our parents. So what are they, boomers? They're not boomers. No, they were Generation X, I think. I'm assuming we're millennials. So reparenting is kind of a big trend right now, kind of teaching yourself to go through your childhood again, but you're your parent this time.
No, there's more for it.
To fix you. Yeah.
So our parents only knew what their parents knew. Their parents only knew what their parents knew. As we went through life. But now we have the ease of internet and the access of information, so we can become a lot better than they were when we had kids.
Well, that's why in America, in an emergency situation, you put your the oxygen mask on yourself first before you help your own children. Because if you're not breathing properly, if you're not healthy, you cannot help the people around you.
So next week, this week we talked about properties. Next week, we're going to talk about functions. A function is, what can you do? What are you doing? So it's like an action. It's something to be done. One function we talked about today was mindfulness, something you're doing. Another function we talked about today was breathing. Another function is reasoning. And so that's where we're going to continue from.
Like doing
Functions.
functions.
Online people, what is the virtual space like? Oh, we have some messages here.
Don't be afraid to speak up.
No, I'm just telling you people are there. Okay. The virtual space.
We're listening. We're here. I'm here.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, girls are being quiet.
Yeah. Sorry.
You guys are like saving the world. They're just like, I'm in your ear. And you're like, oh, you're fighting the good fight, you know?
Yeah, I
Exactly.
feel like I always want to like interject and I want to add, but I'm like away from the computer. Then by the time I get there, you're like 10 tangents ahead, and I'm like, oh my god. When I come in person, I can like contribute.
Yeah, for sure. Administrative note, I changed the Eventbrite thing, Natalia, so it's $20 for every person that does the Eventbrite now.
Okay.
It's like there were like 7 people that signed up, and so on the Eventbrite thing, I said if you don't show up, you have made a donation to the organization. It's not a ticket.
That's good.
This one.
I wasn't here for that.
If you look at this up on Eventbrite, I changed it so I charge people. And I have a content manager for social media now. So that person will be editing these videos and uploading them to all the social media stuff. They are excited. And I told them your job right now is to make enough money that you can pay yourself a salary. Right?
That's very reasonable. Yeah.
It's very reasonable. Okay. Any other thoughts before we go? Anyone want to talk about anything?
Nope.
Okay. Vanessa, you're okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Just thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. You guys are okay?
Outside.
Good. Okay. So we'll see you guys next week.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
Bye.
See you. Have a good weekend.
See you.